Welcome to the HawkCast with your host, AJ Hawk.
Tim Larkin joins us. Tim, you're a big, scary dude. For anyone that's watching the video, I think would agree. I mean, look at you, and you write books about violence and telling us how and when to kill people.
Yeah, that's how people love to put it, and I get it. That's it's one of those things. It's a subject that people quickly either want to joke about or they want to just avoid it at all costs. And so it's cool to have an opportunity to get on with like your audience and kind of talk about this a little bit and talk about why would a guy write about violence? What possible useful information is there to learn about violence?
So your book, When Violence is the Answer, that comes out September 5th. I was lucky enough to get an early copy and read it, and I mean it was right up my alley. I think who grew up a meathead athlete in Ohio, why not? Just the title alone gets me. But it was really cool. I'm sure we'll elaborate on more in the book of why you do it. But what was interesting to me, you tell the story like a little bit about your background. You were a Navy SEAL candidate. Basically, yep. Got there. You got a crazy scuba diving accident, and then you spent 25 years, you say, as a Navy intelligence officer. What exactly is that?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds a lot more, interesting than it really is. What the interesting part for your guys, is the fact that they got to understand. I went into SEAL training. There was something I literally wanted to do my whole life. I'm a kid from the early '80s, so. It's not like it is today where everybody knew about the SEALs. Nobody knew about them, in the late 70s, early 80s. And I ended up in Coronado, California. My dad was a Navy officer. And I got introduced to the SEALs when I was about, 12 years old. All of a sudden, I lived literally right across the street from basic underwater demolition school. And one night, a Sunday night, it was like World War III went off. My brother and I woke up. Everybody woke up. We're in our pajamas. We're looking across the street. And I mean, there's explosions. There's yelling, screaming, automatic fire. We're like, what the hell is going on? And woman runs across the street who's a friend of my mom. She has a glass, two glasses and a bottle of wine. She's like, Carol, don't worry about it. It's just the SEALs. I was hooked. I was like, who are these guys? And so I learned everything there was to learn about that. And as a Navy brat, I was able to hang out with these guys, and learn a little bit about them. And I thought it was a really cool job. The 12-year-old kid to see that, hey, you can get paid to jump out of airplanes, swim all the time, scuba dive, shoot automatic weapons. It just seemed like the perfect job. So I wanted to do it. Went all through college. I was up against, there were a couple thousand guys applied for 2 slots. There were 275 of us that qualified. I got one of the 2 slots. So that's how competitive it was back there. Now, the reason I'm building this up is I became, because of all my background and everything, I really knew everything. I was bigger, faster, and stronger. I knew everything there was to know. I flew through training. My guys did really, really well. I was a superstar. I was arrogant. I was, the number one guy. I was heading to be the number one guy in my class, the anchor man. And then my whole life got turned upside down by an injury. I was flew through all the hardest parts of training, had a no big deal dive one day where we're there, and I blew my ears. The first time I've ever had anything like that happen. I had a pressure wave come in. I was a little bit congested that day. I felt cold water come in through my ear. It's like a spike that went up in the middle of my head, came right back out. All this warm fluid comes out, and all of a sudden I lose all sense of balance. I went into vertigo. It was the first time that I lost control of my body. I've been hit hard. I mean, you can relate to this. Been hit hard. There's a big thing about getting hit, going through pain, working through something. And then there's a whole different world called an injury where you lose control of your body. No matter what your will wants, you lose it. That was my first introduction to injury. It literally, in seconds, ended my SEAL career because my ears never healed correctly and I couldn't pressurize dive. So that's how I made the transition. They liked me enough to keep me in the community as an intelligence officer, and they sent me off, and I got to work at the command with the admiral. And that's how I got introduced to all this crazy stuff that I do today, as far as, all the training, hand-to-hand combat, and I was exposed to all these other aspects of things that I never would have been exposed to if I'd done a normal career during that time. So that's kind of how I got there. But the big thing that I want to get across to everybody is, the problem is we always look at something, when it looks like combat sports or anything like that, we think it's reserved for the elite athletes. We think it's reserved. You got to be the biggest, fastest, and strongest. And oftentimes we dismiss self-protection because we think if we're not one of these gifted physical animals that, there's nothing for us to do. And any guy that can tell you, that's been in it can tell you that, no, we're all vulnerable. And there's similarities in the human body that if we know how to exploit them, they can really help us to protect ourselves.
Yeah. Can you explain a little bit about how criminals, when you would talk to them, if I'm not mistaken, didn't you go back and interview a lot of guys in prison to see what they would do when they would confront somebody?
Yeah. So the thing that everybody has to, that I want people to understand is there's an idea out there that it takes years and years to become really proficient. Say if you're looking at a combat sport, like anything in the UFC, MMA practitioners, world-class athletes, that takes years and years and years to become, one of those guys. And if you're lucky enough to get into, the elite levels of that, you're a phenom, when it comes to that. That's because of the idea of that's a competition. It's a gamification of violence. And there's nothing wrong with it. I don't mean that in a deriding way. I'm in Vegas right now. I mean, I live here. Right across the street from me is one of the biggest MMA studios where every world-class guy comes through. I love it. It's one of my favorite things to do is go over and watch those guys train and compete. But there's a big difference between competition and destruction. Destruction is a skill set that we all can learn, and that's what these prisoners understood. What's interesting is they by far are the best in the world at, just murdering people with their bare hands or improvised tools, bar none. Yet, the vast majority, and I'm talking the vast majority of the most intimidating shot callers in prison have zero training in combat sports and martial arts. So that's something that we all have to understand is that when it comes to being able to use the skill sets of destruction, it's not the same as being an elite, combat sport practitioner that has to work within the rules and the context of the sport.
Is that maybe is it their intent that they're there to kill and we're trying to protect ourselves, or we're not the first reactor? Like how do they get that?
It's easy to dismiss. Like you watch something like Oz or any of these prison movies and everything, and they really don't accurately show what violence really is in the prison system. Violence really is it's the currency. It's what makes everything. It's what backs up everything. So these guys can make money, so they can control things. They literally control the streets from the prisons, and the way they back everything up is through the successful use of violence. So when they look at violence, they look at it from a standpoint of, not anything other than getting a good result. And so the most telling thing is when I talk about a guy named Rene Enriquez. He's what's called the boxer. He's a big shot caller for the Mexican mafia. And he talks about how they develop guys. And he gave a reading list that's required by anybody that's going to become a top level guy in the Mexican mafia. And it included a lot of books that we all are familiar with, 48 Laws of Power, Machiavelli's The Prince, Psychology and Abnormal Psychology. Those were all normal topics. In fact, most of the books that he listed were the same books that I saw for a course of young special operations officers at the JFK Center at Fort Bragg. They were similar until it got down to one book, and that was anatomy. They study anatomy inside and out. And he said a very interesting thing in his interview. He said, we derive all our power from the successful use of violence. We cannot fail. Violence is our commodity. Violence is the way that we get things done. It's how we derive our power. We can't chance it. We have to know how to kill. Oftentimes, the most uncomfortable thing when we look at this subject is the best information comes from the worst people. And that's why I went in. I'm not glorifying these guys at all. I'm not saying that they're not criminal. They absolutely are. But they really do have very good knowledge on how to look at the subject of violence from an aspect of protecting yourself.
I look at what you're doing when you're speaking with these criminals and interviewing them is similar to like a big company, like say my dad, he worked at a huge company called LexisNexis. They would hire like former hackers. I don't know if they'd ever been in prison or anything, but they're hackers that would come in to build like their firewalls and to say, hey, I'm a hacker. I know how they think. I will build your security. That's kind of what you're doing there.
Yeah, well, and that's it. And what's interesting about this is, the corrections officers that introduced me, and the reason I was able to get these guys to talk, and then the corrections officers to talk. At first, everybody misunderstood what I was asking for, and then when they understood that, no, I don't care about the crimes, I don't care about their background, I don't want them to talk about anything that is secret to the organization or anything that there. What I want to talk about is, how do they look at the tool of violence? How do they look at this? How do they train themselves? And there were just consistencies that went all the way through that are extremely useful, and also cut through a lot of misinformation that's out there in the, call it reality self-defense world, MMA. There's a lot of ideas that the public have about what violence is, and then there's a stark reality of what it is. And the good news is it's available to all of us. The bad news is it works on all of us. I tell people all the time, I've been doing this stuff for over 25 years. I've done it in 52 countries. I've trained the most elite units. I've trained soccer moms. I've gone across the board, tens of thousands of people. I truly am a master at what I do. And I don't say that from any aspect other than just I put the work in. The fact is, I walk out the door right here at my office and somebody catches me with a pipe in the back of the head. I go down just like everybody else. All my training doesn't give me any immunity, from somebody successfully using violence on me. And it's just something that we have to accept. But the problem is, most people think, well, gee, it's not even worth it for me to look at this subject because A, it might make me one of them, which is not true. And B, I'm not, whatever your brain's telling you, I'm not big enough, I'm not strong enough, I have this, I have that, not available to me. I hear these subjects all the time. It's a skill set we all should be aware of. We should know how this works. In the prison system that we're talking about, these guys are not, using violence all the time. They're actually pretty sparing on when they use violence. But when they use it in a very specific manner, and it's only for result. It literally is life or death every time. It's grievous bodily harm. It's something that we can learn at, because the only time we as civilians should, law-abiding citizens should use this information is if we're devoid of choice. If we were facing imminent grievous bodily harm and we have no exits, no way to get away, the only thing that's going to get us out of that system is to be able to successfully use the tool of violence. And that's where we need to have good information. And that's the idea of sharing this, because there's 99% of the things that we think we have to respond to, especially young guys. I remember when I was a young guy, I thought I had to respond to a lot of things that really are not anything we need to respond to and can get us in a lot of trouble. You learn very quickly the difference between the two.
What would be one or two common misconceptions or misinformation out there that the general public has on this topic?
One is that bigger, faster, stronger is, the overriding issue. A predator is going to look at you, if a predator is looking for a victim, they don't fear you. And so they're going to make mistakes oftentimes. Oftentimes when they come in, they're going to give up vulnerable parts of their body. They're going to get very close to you. So the idea of being able to use a tool of violence is not one of, hey, we both get in the ring and we both know what's going on. What it is being able to exploit opportunities. And that's really what this is all about. Understanding how trauma to the human body works. And then, being able to understand how injury works. And when we talk about injury, you're talking about an injury to a structure or a sensory system of the human body. And, your audience will relate to it, because I get all of our data. This was the big thing. We got all of our data on injury from sports injury data. And the reason we use sports injury data is because it's humans colliding with humans and humans colliding with the planet. You and I can replicate those types of forces. There's a lot of bad information that's out there from car crashes, and there's stuff where guys are showing like a side kick to a guy's femur and the femur cracking. And that picture of the femur cracking is from like a major car crash, that we can't replicate those forces. So, understanding how, trauma affects the human body through sports injury data is absolutely key. It's your Rosetta Stone, basically, on how to protect yourself.
How much of what you teach is having awareness? I have 4 young kids, and I teach them every day, like, have some awareness. Like, and I know we'll get into the phones and headphones after that, but like, just, is that the biggest thing? Like, trying to prevent as much as I can?
Yeah. The goal that I have with any client is to minimize the chance of violence ever entering your life. And you just nailed the number one thing, is awareness. And it's a really rare commodity these days, because our attention is demanded in so many different areas, especially young children. Children now, of course, you add the technology on top of just being a kid. And, I've got a 7-year-old son. I've got a 7-year-old son and twin 4-year-old daughters. I have an older son, who's already in college. But I'll tell you what, if I'm trying to get a hold of my son, the rare times that we let him like get on an iPad and play some games, I literally have to, pull it away from him, look eye to eye, go, hey, they get totally immersed. And so, yes, awareness is number one. And awareness isn't like this paranoid, I've got to be in a certain state at all times. Awareness is basically, your head's up, you're walking around, you know what's going on. You have to understand, predators look for easy marks. They don't want a challenge. They don't want to deal with somebody that's aware. They'll wait for somebody, because there's too many easy marks that'll come along. So especially with your children, you want to teach them that, hey, when you're going from A to B, it's very important that you understand what's going on, what's going on around you, who's around you. Don't just walk in, totally unaware. It's one of those things that when I train people, you'll hear something like that from me and you'll say, yeah, I get it, Tim. I heard it. No, you didn't. And so what I do is I'll take people, and when they come and, train with us or do anything, I show video. I show tons of video of closed circuit TV captured of people just walking around oblivious, unaware, and how quickly it happens and how quickly it changes your life. And that jars people. And then I show people, okay, if you're not aware and you get into the situation that I just talked about, where you're going to have to use the tool of violence, here's what it's going to take for you to survive this. You're going to have to do this type of damage to somebody to survive this. It's deservedly so. This person is a criminal trying to, to literally change your life. But here's the work you're going to have to do. That fundamentally changes people. When you give them that kinesthetic awareness of what it would take for them to survive it because they were unaware, all of a sudden it kicks back in, and they say, and people, there's a behavioral change by going through this process and understanding violence, that, you do change. I mean, so people come back and tell me all the time, hey, Tim, I'm a lot more aware. I don't do what I used to do. I'm actually, I'm not taking the same routes to work every day because, it was kind of risky. I was going through an area that it was convenient, saved me about 10 minutes, but hey, it's a dangerous part of town and I don't do that anymore. I'll go out of my way to make sure that I avoid any potentiality to bring it into my life. I'll let things go as far as, road rage incidences and things like that, things that they would have participated in before, after being educated and seeing that, hey, these are all gifts to you. Anything that you can literally talk your way out of or just dismiss is an absolute gift. You don't want to have to take it to the next level, because it literally can change your life in seconds.
It makes me think of some of the stories you hear of college kids when, say, they get into a fight outside a bar. Kid punches a guy, he falls down, hits his head on the curb, and dies. I mean, that's manslaughter now. This kid, it's just an innocent college fight, and probably just 2 drunks, can alter your whole. Those are the stories that always scared me. Do you have a lot of parents that send like their college kids to you?
Yeah, I have a ton of kids that come through that way. A lot. It's popular. It's either boys or girls. The boys, they're ready for it right about that age. Girls, I'll train as young as 11. Sexual assaults happening at ever earlier, years. Girls don't have the fascination with violence that boys do. They don't have to navigate kind of the locker room, violence that you and I had to do. We socially use violence to communicate with each other. We'll knock each other around. We'll do stuff like that. There's acceptable things. And you kind of were talking about it just now in that incident. most of those types of encounters are kind of a, socially aggressive situation. Nobody in that scenario meant to have somebody die. That wasn't the intent. But what I try to educate people on is once you cross the physical plane with somebody, all bets are off. And I will show, video of the epic bar brawl and two guys really slugging it out, going at it, boom. And at the end, they're bloodied, they're battered, but they're up and around and they're walking away. I'll show then right next to it another video where it's exactly what you said. One guy, there's an exchange. One guy clocks the other guy. That guy's head hits the concrete. He's dead. Instant manslaughter. And what the juxtaposition is, you just saw this epic battle where guys were going, at it full force and everybody walked away. And then you see this other incident where it just in an instant, both were avoidable. And that's the main thing. If I can get to young guys, to that, because we had I do a lot of work in the special operations community, and we had a sniper in Arkansas get into an altercation with a guy who happened to be a male nurse. He's kind of like an EMT, male nurse guy, and they were arguing. I think it was, if I'm correct, I believe it was over a woman. And big surprise there, but it was like 4 a.m. And the same thing, the nurse ends up clocking the sniper. The sniper goes over, bangs his head, he's dead. Instant manslaughter. Two young guys, alcohol, testosterone, just a bad mix. And now, one guy's facing manslaughter charges, the other guy's dead, all over something that was completely avoidable. Whereas I defined for everybody else, when is the time? When is the time? The time is, like you said, you're devoid of choice. The story that I use to illustrate that is a story from, I think it was almost 12 years ago now. It was in London, and I was over there training at the time, and a young lawyer got off of the subway, the tube stopped there, walked through a nice part of London, decided to cut through the park. Not as dicey as it sounds, but he walked through the park. 2 guys attacked him at knife point, jacked him up against a tree, asked for his watch, his wallet, his briefcase. They gave him everything. He gave these guys everything, and they left. Everybody loves that part of the story. Second part is as he's walking away, those guys come back. When they come back, they're coming back at a rapid pace, head down, knives drawn. They ran him down, stabbed him to death. People heard, from the condos that were close by, they heard the young man yelling, why? I gave you everything. It's my goal for any client that I train to understand the difference between those two situations. The first situation, it was definitely aggressive, but it was social aggression. And the reason I say social aggression is because there was some communication going on there. And in a situation like that, you can choose not to respond with violence. You can sit there and say, I think this is just a robbery. I am going to go ahead and comply here. And I'm pretty sure once I give these guys what they need, they're going to leave. The second situation where there was zero communication, you'll notice the heads were down, the knives were drawn. Boom. I need my people to understand that that's asocial violence. Asocial meaning no communication, and they're coming at you. They need to understand those cues. I provide training environments, and I talk about it in the book, the difference of what type of training environment you need for, asocial, training. And essentially it's just no communication. So the difference, I told you that I'm right across from one of the big MMA studios here. And I love going over there. They play kick-ass music. It's fun to watch the training. The guys go at it. And what's really cool after is they help each other up. They give each other bro hugs, and they compliment each other on what they're doing. And there's great sportsmanship that I see over there. Hard training, but great sportsmanship. If you then came over to my place, there'd be zero music. There's no sounds other than people hitting the mats and, coming back up and doing their strikes and getting everything done. Because the environment that I'm training my people for, and one is not better than the other. It's just we're training for a different skill set here. I want them to recognize asocial. They know when they're down on the mat that their training partner is not going to sit there and give them a helping hand and pull them back up, because that's not going to be out there on the street. And it's not like this hardcore thing where we make angry faces or anything. It's just very much, emotionless. and you're totally focused in on your targeting and what you're doing. And it's and it's mentally draining to train that way. But that's what people come back and tell me was the greatest gift that they had. People, unfortunately, guys, and girls that train with me that have had to deal with violence after training always tell me the same thing. I recognized asocial. I recognized the lack of communication. I realized, oh, this is it. This is the real thing. Had a 52-year-old dentist who trained with us. He walks in on a Sunday to do some work at his office. As he walks in, there's a tweaker in there breaking into his dispensary, going for some of the drugs. The dentist is there. He walked in to an area where there really was no exit for him. The tweaker sees him, draws a knife, and comes charging at him. This guy recognizes, oh, damn, this is it. He charges the guy who is charging him with a knife because he recognizes, I got to get over to my target. Anything that's going to change anything in my favor resides in that guy's body, and I got to get there right away. He goes over there, slams the guy on the side of the neck as the guy tried to stab him. He then grabs his head and he starts jamming it into the the doorway. Just bam, 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 drops the guy. He was just about to stomp on him at that point because he was, he knew the guy was trying to stab him, when he recognized that the guy was out cold and he was non-functional and he was no longer a threat. He was able to get the knife, pulled away, called the cops, tied the guy up, and was able to, make the report. This guy had never had a fight in his life. And what he said, the thing that got me into action was I recognized there was no communication. This guy saw me, drew his knife, and just charged me. And he goes, I realized the only thing I could do is use violence. And he goes, the only reason I know that is because of the way we trained at that point. And again, this guy's not a superhuman guy. We didn't teach him, hey, take the head and hit it into the door jamb. He just recognized how to use the tool of violence. He recognized, hey, I've got control of him here, and that's a really hard surface, and this might help me out. And he was able to improvise and use all that. But it was the fact that he recognized asocial. He didn't try to talk to him. He didn't try to engage. Hey, what are you doing here? Why are you here? He recognized this guy's coming to, do grievous bodily harm to me. And so that's the differentiation. And what's interesting is when I take, say, like a really well-trained athlete, I've had NFL guys, I've had baseball players, I've had a lot of guys train with me. And what's amazing about training, even world-class MMA guys, when they train, what's cool is those guys are so used to training correctly, meaning, putting the methods in, that once you give them these principles, they're really, they adapt faster than any of my other students. I mean, they're very on it. So it's not a question of, do you have to do one thing or the other? This is just something that enhances you from a self-protection standpoint. It doesn't take away from anything that you already have. So it's kind of nice in that manner. But again, if you can get that, and the focus of the book is really to engage your mind on the subject of violence and change it, because that's where the biggest change happens. The physical training, I can train anybody that way. I can train you in all of that stuff. But if I can't get your mind to wrap around this subject correctly, if you're going to have all these fantasies or misnomers about, the tool of violence, then, you're going to be facing, I assume the threat you're going to be facing is going to be one of these worst of the worst that I met in the prisons. I assume that's what you're going to be up against. And I want to I can't give you anything better than a 50-50 on that. But most people don't have a 50-50 right now. Most people have a 5% chance of doing something. And the reason I say 50-50 is because in violence, it's usually the first person that gets an injury that walks away. And everybody, until that first collision happens, everybody has a chance.
Going back to that guy in the park, so when they turned around and they came back for him, how do you teach, do I go after them or turn and try to run the other way? What could he have done there?
So this is a great opportunity to give you one of the bigger principles that we need to understand. It's going to sound extremely harsh, but let me get through it. There's nothing to learn from the victim's perspective. There's nothing.
So what does that mean exactly?
And what I mean is, trying to sit there and say, okay, what could the victim have done? That's not where the learning is, believe it or not, for us when it comes to the tool of violence. And the reason I say that is when in prison, there was a study that was done where these guys were shown a bunch of different attacks. And they were they said, hey, what do you think about this? And every one of these guys, to a man, looked at it from the perspective of the successful use of violence. They sat there, so whoever in that scenario, they didn't judge it other than black or white, who won, because that's where the useful knowledge is. The useful knowledge is, okay, what worked in this situation? And that's how you look at it from a very utilitarian standpoint. Trying to rework it from a situation of, okay, they ran him down, were stabbing him. Could he have blocked his way out of it? Could he have done X, Y, or Z? That's just going to put you behind the power curve. You have to tell your brain that I'm only going to identify with the successful use of the tool because I want my brain to constantly see me being successful with violence. That is not condoning the criminal act. Okay. And so from a sports analogy, it would be like, say a golfer. A world-class golfer using visualization is not going to sit there and say, imagine himself on the tee, go tee to the rough, from the rough to the beach, 3 shots into the beach, up over the green, 4 putting. That's useless to him. What's he going to visualize? He's going to visualize, tee to fairway, fairway to green, 1 putt when he comes in. If that's the practical thing for that particular hole, you're going to visualize the optimum when you do that. I understand the empathy of saying, because we're all concerned, we're saying this was unjustified that this young man was killed and murdered by these thugs, and absolutely true. But I'm interested in protecting the living. I can't do anything for that young guy. What I can do is for you is to say, okay, how did those guys attack him and why did that work? And then the alpha to that is, how could you have done it better? It sounds to the average person that we're condoning violence, but it's not. It's we're protecting our brain. We do this all the time. We do this in the sports world. We're absolutely brutal about, the efficiency that we put into our heads and how we think about things. We slowly train, methodically train to get our timing right, to get everything down. We don't train wrong, and we don't look at something that is broken and inefficient and say, how could we do that? We want to see the efficiency that's working and then improve upon it. So you have to be very protective of how you look at the tool of violence and how you view that. It was a controversial subject when we first started doing this we started introducing this in the late 80s, early 90s in the special operations community, but it made a huge difference in people's reaction times and their ability to take action on that. The problem is when I say something like that, and you're probably wrestling with it yourself, you're going, Tim, wasn't there anything this guy could have done? Are there anything? That's not the useful knowledge for us at that point. The useful knowledge for us was to recognize, hey, one situation that this guy was confronted with was antisocial aggression. And there's an opportunity there for you to communicate, to talk your way out of trouble if you choose to do that. The second situation, there's only one thing that's going to work, and that's going to be the tool of violence. And you better have something in the toolbox because it's going to happen regardless of whether you want it to happen or not. These predators are going to make it happen. And so it's these black swan events that I want to properly prepare people for. It's hard because there's a lot of well-meaning people out there, showing a lot of things, about, training out. I did this one breakdown of an ATM attack, and these 2 older people were attacked at an ATM by these guys, and it was brutal. And I put it up on YouTube, and I had everybody there, and most of the comments, I got a lot of comments from my industry, and a lot of the comments were, well, they didn't position themselves right. The female should have been taking out the, doing the ATM work while the male turned, and this guy had a bum leg. He was an older guy. He should have been facing out, and there should have been more awareness. And, is that true? Yeah, it's true. That might have made a difference. I doubt it. He might have seen the attack a little bit earlier. But what I point out to everybody is nobody in my industry made a point of looking at the time code. The time code was 10:30 at night. They went to the ATM. And my question was, what was so important that they couldn't have got up in the morning? Because we've heard, how many times have you heard precipitously at nighttime, ATM attacks are just, it just hockey sticks up on that. And yet these people probably, they thought it was, hey, I should be able to go to the ATM whenever I want. I shouldn't have to feel like I can't. And therefore I'm going to do it because it's convenient for me. And again, wishing the world was a certain way versus dealing with reality is something that I can't, I can't justifiably have my people, when I get a hold of them, I can't do that to them. I have to give them the best information. And so it's a disservice for me to look at anything from a victim's situation and try to help you, learn how to use the tool of violence better and more successfully.
Interesting. Sounds like that old couple's got a meth habit, Tim. Think about 10:30. What else would I need that cash for?
Oh man,
Grandma and Grandpa, man, that's a bad way to go, isn't it?
Yeah, it was. It was pretty brutal, man.
Yeah, I'm not laughing at their murder, but yeah, but it's a great point. No, when you turn it around, and you think that 100% makes sense. Yeah, like I'm not gonna sit there and I think it'd be hilarious if I saw my grandma and grandpa at the ATM, and my grandma's in here typing, and my grandpa has his back turned to her, like arms folded, like scanning, like that would just be hilarious, I think.
Yeah, well, and the problem is that couple probably got away with it, numerous times. I tell people all the time, I equivocate it. There's a lot of behaviors that we do that after people get exposed to this information, they change and they realize it's basically you've been sleeping with your head on the railroad track, and the train didn't come last night. It doesn't mean the train's not going to eventually come. And all I'm telling people is, hey, why don't you just take your head off the railroad track? And then you don't have to worry about it. And that's really what it is. It's behavior modifications that we can all make in our lives to make ourselves a little bit, safer and a lot less likely to have violence enter our life. Is very simple, very straightforward, things. But it's something as boring as that. And the problem is where most people miss it is they don't include the physical. The reason the name of the book is When Violence is the Answer. I have a tagline that I used, and it says, violence is rarely the answer, but when it is, it's the only answer. And that's what, it was controversial when we did the book, that we put that as a title, and I had to fight for it until the Pulse nightclub was attacked. And during that time, then my publishers realized, oh, wow, this is on the top of everybody's mind. Violence is a very specific term, meaning if I say fight, that conjures up a lot of different ideas. It's a pretty vague term. I can fight with my friend. I can fight with my wife. I can fight with my boss. I can fight with my kids. That doesn't necessarily mean that involves any physical violence. When you say violence, it's a very specific term, and it makes people understand. It's the it's you see in sports all the time. There'll be a great hit and people will cheer. The crowd goes nuts at a great tackle, really, really hard hit. Boom. Miscalculation happens. Somebody zigs, the other guy zags, and all of a sudden somebody's knee gets blown out. The crowd all of a sudden goes from cheering to, oh, everybody recognizes. You get that gut feeling. You see it. When you visually see injury, you know the difference. You know the difference between a hard hit and that's not going to work anymore. That guy is injured. That guy is completely absorbed with that particular injury, and he's done. That's the difference, in that, there's nothing glorifying, when it comes to injury to the human body. It should only be used if your life is truly on the line. But you cannot disagree with the results. The results will absolutely save your life because it takes the brain out of the equation. What makes every human being dangerous, you hear this all the time, but you don't really think about it. It's that brain. And if I can take the brain out of the equation by putting an injury on the human body to where the brain no longer through will or harshness, when my ear blew at that point and I lost all control over my body in vertigo, will meant nothing. Guts meant nothing. Determination meant nothing. I physically was unable to control my body at that point. No matter what I wanted to do, I had to do what it did, at that point. And you see that a guy blows his knee out on the field. He's no longer thinking about going after the ball, getting the tackle, or doing whatever he was doing before. You see a soccer player, get his ankle taken out. He's no longer going after the other players and stuff. He's completely focused on that particular part of his body, whether he wants to be or not. And that's what we do. We exploit that in when we're facing criminal violence. We exploit injury to the human body to save our lives, to shut down that criminal brain so it no longer is a factor.
How much do you work with people on when violence is needed? So say we always want to be, I know that's a big thing, you want to be the first to inflict damage to somebody. But let's say someone breaks into your house. This happened to one of my buddies in Green Bay. Couple guys thought he wasn't home. He looked through the window. He saw him kind of chatting. They come in the front door. He sat in his bedroom, I guess, while they were rummaging through stuff downstairs. He unscrewed his bedpost, I guess, hid behind it. Guy walked in the doorway, bam, blasted the dude in the head. The other guy went running, called the cops. Everything's fine. But then, of course, like everything now, it seems like that guy sues him, tries to sue him in court and say he hurt me. And we hear stories of that. Like, when does the law come to effect, and what should you do in that sense? And like, how do you know what decision to make?
Everything is basically, from a legal standpoint, most districts in the U.S. right now, the majority of them have some version of the castle doctrine, which means you can protect your house. Now, doesn't protect you from what happened to your friend, which is he probably was brought up on in civil court for being sued for excessive use of force. And again, that's up to the lawyers at that point. That's unavoidable. The way I train my people is the only time that I would use violence is if you're devoid of choice. And what does that mean? That means that you have no exits. So I don't know if your friend would have been able to get out of the house at that point. If he was able to exit himself and his family out of the house safely, and you had a clear opportunity to do that, you probably should take that first. If you had a firearm, I tell my people, if you had a firearm, the threat would be such that you would feel justified in emptying that firearm into the person who's attacking you. That's the level threshold of the threat. That's the only time you'd use the training that I would give you, is if it met those thresholds, because that is going to happen no matter what. Now, I would look at your friend, from what you told me on that, I would say your friend did exactly what he should have done. Because they was coming in, he was really devoid of choice. He knew there were multiple people in the house at that time, and that he took action on it. Now, did he have to deal with the other side of the legal? Yes, and that's just an unavoidable consequence a lot of times, especially if it's an athlete. There might be some money, and everybody's going to go for a payday. That said, we don't know what would have happened if he didn't take action. And then not only that guy got in his bedroom, but multiple guys got in there, and then he would have had to deal with that. He was able to basically shortcut all of that, take one guy out, and the rest of them all, went running. So, what I look at is the physical aspects of it, that point of violence, because there's a lot of stuff talking about how you got there. There's a lot of anger management stuff that can be taken care of, where most people, how did they get to the point of violence? Well, all this bad behavior happened to that point. And then afterwards, that's where terms like self-defense come in and all that. And that is taking the act of violence that happened. And then, the law is sitting there saying, okay, was it justified? Was it criminal? And what are the penalties? But where there's zero information for most people is that act of violence, that point where violence actually happens. The training is really across the board pretty bad for preparing you for something like that. And that's really what we kind of specialize in, is that aspect of it. I don't think if you asked your friend, and I don't know him, but I'm sure if I asked him, hey, put yourself back in that situation that night, would you have done anything different? Meaning, and what I mean about that is not change like, oh yeah, I should have had a better, this, that, or the other thing, preventative, saying, no, it happened. As it happened, would you have done anything different? and I'm sure, that was really, he improvised. He got himself a weapon. He was able to take action successfully, and he prevented anything else from happening at that point. So I don't know how he could have done much better. And he was able to do it without loss of life,
Oh, 100%. His only answer to me, maybe I would have hit him harder. He was honestly, that's the only, even though he got him, he did, like you said, it kept him alive. The other guy ran away. You never know what could have happened.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's it. And those are the kind of outcomes I want for my people. I want that unknown of, if he hadn't done that, we don't know what would have happened, but we do know that it was justified. I mean, obviously your friend wasn't criminally prosecuted on that. And that's the most important thing, is that, he judiciously used violence. He truly had an imminent threat. They were probably exploited the fact that he was, he was an athlete or a friend, and, a larger guy, and there was some money to be had. So, unfortunately, our legal system loves to take advantage of stuff like that. It's crazy, when you look at it. A guy that literally broke into your house can sue you for being too violent with him, which is,
Yeah, that's a different. Yeah, at least stay alive and fight it in court. You'll be fine. But I wanted to think. That got me thinking. Let's say it's a perfect world. Which is not reality, but we're in a perfect world, and one of your clients has someone attack them. What's the quickest and most effective, move, strike, whatever it is, to disable that attacker?
Well, I appreciate that. And I get where you're asking for, meaning that, we love to do, hack stuff.
Let me chop that Adam's apple or whatever, the movies.
No. Yeah. And I guarantee you, whatever I tell you right now, when it hit the fan, it wouldn't be available to you. Yeah. And so here's my answer. The best target, the best injury that you can get is the one that's available to you. And then the story I always use is, I had a client that was a doctor getting into his Lexus, putting his groceries in. It was a little bit of rain coming down. And again, he was unaware. He was just kind of like, what a shitty day, and blah, blah, blah. And he puts his groceries in the car, and he has his door open, and a 45 comes over and is put right on his temple. In self-defense, if you hear in my business, there's some good people in my business, but there's just a lot of knuckleheads in my business. But a lot of people will sit there and go, there's only 3 targets you need to know: eyes, groin, and throat. And they think they're real hard when they say that. They're like, yeah. But most of them don't know how to attack those places. Most of them show really ineffective strikes. It's pathetic how a lot of the training is. But they'll say that. And that makes us feel good. We're like, eyes, groin, and throat. Well, in my client's situation, what do you think wasn't available to him?
Any of those.
The eyes, the groin, and the throat. They were all covered by the glass or the door. But what he did see out of his peripheral vision was the top of the guy's foot. He put his foot under the car when he came over. And he knew how to do, a strike to that. So he dropped down, did a knee drop on the top of the foot, broke all the bones of the foot, was able to reach behind, pulled the ankle, from behind, and the guy went down. He was screaming already from the broken foot. He dropped the gun, and he came up, put it under the door, lifted up, snapped the guy's leg, and the guy passed out from there. Now, wow. The top of the foot is kind of like a punchline for most people. It's like one of those self-defense punchlines that you see, stomp the foot. They show women doing it. If you understand, there's a ton of bones in the foot, striking at the very top where the laces, basically are, and you stomp down on the foot, there's a tendon that you snap, and the foot just doesn't work anymore. It just absolutely flops out and everything. That's exactly what this guy knew. He knew how to exploit what he had. And that's what I do with my clients. I give them principles. What we were just talking about, when you asked me, you said, hey, Tim, if you just had a client, everything's perfect, what are the 3 things he could do? That's the equivalent of saying, hey, I got to learn multiplication, but really, what's the top 3 equations? And I'd say, okay, it's 12 times 12. It's 12 times, 87, and then it's 52 times 66. You're cool. With those 3, you're done. And sure enough, when it happens to you, it's 230 times 13, and you've never memorized that equation. You don't know that equation because you don't know how to multiply. What I do is I teach people how to multiply. I give them principles that work regardless of the threat, because I have no idea how it's going to happen to you. What I can do is I can give you this Rosetta Stone of targets that's available in the human body. I can give you site pictures that you can work with from various site pictures of how to access these and get a real injury. And then you'll end up making the decision, just like my client did. I didn't show him that, idea of, break the foot, pull it out. He just understood how trauma of the human body worked. And he understood, hey, I've just done this. That allows me to do this next strike. That allows me to get to this next thing. And then, the result was, the threat was non-functional at that point. He made those decisions. It wasn't a specific technique that I taught him.
How do you work through the human instinct with like fight or flight? Like when we're presented with a gun at our temple, I would imagine there's a lot of us that would just freeze and wouldn't have the balls to drop down and take the guy on. Like, how do you work through that with clients?
Now, this was a guy that trained with me. I think this was after 2.5 years. He went through a 2-day training with me. Now, I'm also, I preface everything by telling you, in the prison systems, the best guys, the elite dudes have zero training in combat sports and martial arts. So what we're talking about is we're talking about intent. Intent is from knowledge, and intent is also from working correctly, doing correct work. And it doesn't take a lot of correct work for you to do this. This guy wasn't a hero. He wasn't, he was the first one. He said, I was scared to death. I just realized, my opportunity was there. That was my one opportunity that I had, and I exploited it. There's a really famous, story of a woman. I remember this is probably a young officer when this happened, and it was over in London, and it was the woman that Ian Fleming actually based the character Montepenny on. It was somebody that he worked with during World War II. And she was a wealthy lady, and she was being driven into her Knightsbridge, which is a really nice part of London, Knightsbridge mansion. And 2 guys came out of the bushes and attacked her. And she had an older chauffeur that was taking her out. He had opened the door for her. They hit him with like one of those lead-filled slugs, the saps, just racked him in the back of the head and knocked him out. Other guy came around, put a knife right to her, to her stomach area. She had stilettos on, which I thought was pretty cool for a woman her age. She was in her 70s at the time. And she was getting out of the car. She stomped on his foot with the stiletto. And so she stomped right through, and it literally pierced through the top of his foot at that point. He screamed, dropped the knife. She grabbed onto his hips, and she kneed him repeatedly into the groin to where the guy went over in the bushes, and he started puking at that point. The other guy thought for sure she had a weapon and just went off running. When the Metropolitan Police showed up, they said to her, they said, my God, he had a knife. Why did you do that? And she said, I just saw that they didn't care about age. I saw what they did to my chauffeur, and I knew that my life was in danger. Now, this is a woman, and they say, oh, well, she must have been trained, from that was in the 1940s. This is in the 1980s. This woman hadn't trained in years. It was the fact that she recognized the situation and she had some specific knowledge. They got that, World War II training, and the World War II training was a lot like what it's a modification of what I do. I've taken it to the next level with that, but it was basically understanding basic trauma of the human body. Once you learn it, you don't forget it. It's not one of these things that changes, it's just exploiting it. The more you train, the more efficient you get at it, but you can stay effective, for a lifetime without training on a regular basis. And that's the great part about this knowledge base.
What about you personally? Have you had any situations come up where guys have tried to jump you or rob you or anything?
Yeah, I've had situations, I've done contract work. Basically I started doing like Blackwater type work before there was Blackwater in the early 90s. So I've been in South America a lot. I've been in rough parts of the world. I've trained in a lot of third world countries. I've had situations happen. I think probably the more interesting story is when I don't use it. I had a situation. There are a couple of them, but I'll just give you one recent one. Well, not recent, about probably 10 years ago. I was on the cover of Black Belt magazine. It was one of the media things. I just got there. My son had the copy. I was picking him up. I was going to go do a seminar in San Diego. I was going to drop him off with my brother. My brother had he was working with the SEAL teams, creating these new speedboats. And so he was going to test out one. And my son was going to go with him for the day. And then we were all going to get together after my seminar and go have dinner. And so it was going to be a great day. So I pick him up, leaving where he lives, came down. There's a hill. This guy comes blazing down the hill out of nowhere. I didn't see him. And he thinks somehow I was trying to cut him off. I mean, there's nobody on the road at this point. So he flips me the bird and just keeps going. And I just kind of, laugh and wave and stuff. So I pull up alongside him at the stoplight because I have to at this point. And he's looking over at me. And I can tell this guy's just had a really bad day. And he looks at me and he starts just, he sees my son. My son is 8 years old at the time. He sees this 8-year-old kid sitting in the passenger seat, and he just starts using every expletive. Hey, tough guy, you think you're this? Oh, you think you're tough? You get tattoos? I'll kick your ass. I'll do all. And he's just baiting me. And I said, hey, I'm really sorry if you thought that I cut you off. I hope you have a good day. I didn't mean to do anything. And I'm just being really conciliatory to him at this whole time. And this guy just keeps going. He goes, yeah, I knew you're, whatever. And he drives off. My son's looking at me. He's holding the magazines going, Dad, why didn't you get out? Why aren't you, you're this guy, blah, 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 as little kids think. And it was my opportunity to say, yeah, that's true. That's absolutely true. I said, I probably could have. I probably could have got out. I probably could have pulled him out of his car, and I could have probably beat the crap out of him. And I said, it would have felt great. I said, it really would. I go, especially in front of you with him saying all this stuff. I said, but what if he had a gun? What if I injured him to the point to where now, I'm facing prosecution? I said, and over what? Over the fact that this guy was having a bad day and he just wanted to call me some names or do things. And it was really interesting because, here I was at this point where, I was getting a lot of media attention at the time. And, I was getting on the cover of a lot of different magazines and doing stuff that, you had to keep yourself in check. And what's so great about that, I was able to go right into my seminar, and that was the opening story for everybody. And was it hard? Yeah, it was absolutely hard. It was really hard for me not to do that. But, I had to take into consideration the whole thing, because there were times when I was younger where I did things that I was damn lucky I got away with. I responded to things that were eminently avoidable. That situation with that guy, as unpleasant as it was completely avoidable. All I had to do was use my social skills. It cost me nothing other than a little ego hit at that point. And the fact, before, like in my late 20s, I literally put my life on the line for an ego, for little ego situations. And, luckily, I survived all that stuff. But looking back on it, I realized how, risky that was.
It's all ego right there. And then there's guys listening to this right now. Tommy Tough guys, yeah, there's no way I'd let anyone speak to me in front of my son like that. Like, that's the thing. It's all about ego.
Hey, dude, I'll tell you, what? I was listening to Boz Rutan. I don't know if, some of you guys probably know who
Boz is. The man. I love Boz.
Boz is awesome, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I forgot what interview it was that I was listening to, but I got to give him credit, man, because I hope some of these knuckleheads heard this. He talked about a time being in Amsterdam. I believe it was Amsterdam, or I'm pretty sure it was Amsterdam. He was at a bar in Amsterdam, and he got baited by these two guys, and he got called out into the alley, and he took on these two guys, and he beat the crap out of them. He knocked the one guy out right away. He beat the second guy twice, where he hit his head on the concrete, and there was blood everywhere. Boz talks about being covered, having blood on himself, running to his hotel room, sitting in the bathroom in his hotel room, just shaking the whole night, waiting for the cops to come get him because he was sure he murdered that guy. And he knew, oh my God, this was over nothing. This was over nothing. I allowed this to happen. I allowed my ego to go, and I allowed to do stuff like that. I just, I get, you can be, people talk about tough guys. I mean, man, dude, go to I thought I knew tough. And I mean, I've been around some, asocial freaking killers. And I mean, some of the top guys in our military who are stone cold killers. I've never seen anything like going in this prison system. I've never seen anything like the environment that's in there. So any of these wannabes that are sitting there talking about, yeah, I do this, I do that. Dude, you wouldn't do anything if you saw what this was about. And you wouldn't screw your life up like this willingly. We are so lucky to have what we have right now. And that, if I can get across to these guys, think about it 3 days later. Does it pass the 3 days test? And what I mean by that is whatever you're about to take action on, this guy said this to me, so I have to respond. Cool. 3 days later, either you're in a jail cell or you're 6 feet under. Was it worth it? Was it worth it? And hardly anything passes that test. And believe me, did I like being insulted in front of my son? Absolutely not. I didn't want that to happen at all, but again, I had to pull back and I had to sit there and say, okay, let's work all this thing out. Where could this go possibly? And I knew once I told you earlier, once you cross that physical plane, there's no coming back from that. We don't know what's going to happen. The guy might look like Schwarzenegger in his prime. I hit him to the solar plexus thinking, hey, I'm just taking his air. I don't know he has a bad heart and I just caused an arrhythmia and now the guy has a heart attack and dies on me. The solar plexus for most situations, it's a pretty safe target. Most people recover from that. Just takes your air. Mm-hmm. But there have been guys that have literally died from those strikes. So you just never know.
Yeah, the tough guy thing it's hilarious to me. I'm sure you being a big guy with tattoos, guys love to say stuff or think that, it's got to be great to walk in the room and know you could just dominate everybody. But every tough guy I've ever met in my life has never told me they're tough. They don't have to. They know it and they're confident and they very rarely get in street fights or little tussles with guys because they don't care. It's almost like it's beneath them to try to fight some punk in a bar that tries to talk to just to make comments to think he's tough to impress a girl or something. Yeah,
I'm amazed. What's funny is I go through, I tell this to people all the time, I go through life, especially with somebody I don't know. I treat them like they're 6 seconds away from a shooting spree and I don't want to set it off. And so how would you communicate with somebody like that? Hey, you'd be really conciliatory. Hey, how you doing? People always, oh God, you're such a nice guy. And then what's funny is I see people like, oh, you're such a nice guy. And then they think it's like, oh, okay. So I can start, basically giving you a hard time and I can make little shots at you. I can take, make shots about being a meathead, musclehead or something like that. Then I know I got them. Then I know, I go, okay, good. If this idiot is a problem, it's going to be so easy to take him out because he's just such a knucklehead. He doesn't understand that, dude, there's a great line from a John Travolta movie in Swordfish where he says, don't confuse kindness with weakness. And a lot of people make that mistake. I know a lot of guys, and I know some guys that are just, I've seen encounters where the other person has no idea how lucky they were. They have no idea who they were talking to and they have no idea what this guy could do to them. And they've made these comments that are just so, it's just so unnecessary. It's really interesting. One of my friends is a guy named Charles Poliquin. I don't know if you know him. He's a world-class strength coach.
Oh yeah. That guy's a monster.
Dude, he's a great dude, right? And Charles is really interesting. We were talking one time and I put it in the book. When he goes to an unfamiliar area, he trains a lot of law enforcement guys as well. And he'll usually go to one of the local law enforcement guys and he'll say, hey, where do all the ex-felons train? What gym do they train at? And the guy will say, well, most of them train over here. He goes, great, that's where I'm going to train. And people are like, whoa, you go there because you want to be with tough guys or something? Charles is like, no, nothing like that. He goes, by far, when I go to those gyms, those guys are the most courteous. They, he goes, everything gets done. Nobody's grabbing your weights. Nobody's standing in front of you. Nobody's staying on a treadmill, talking to their girlfriend. He said, there's none of that. He goes, they come from an environment where everything is backed up by violence. And therefore, the default is to be courteous. And yet it's filled with probably some of the more aggressive individuals and people that actually could take action than if you go to the local, Equinox or something where everybody's, just being a wannabe. And stuff. And it was really interesting. And that's what I found also. The more competent the person is with the use, and I say it from the standpoint to delineate from the criminal, from the justified use of lethal force, the guys that are more trained for justified use of lethal force, and I include a lot of our first responders and people like that, are usually the calmest, nicest, most engaging personalities and guys that will actually help you. They're not there to threaten people, and they're not there to put it out there because they don't want it. They understand what it takes to use the tool of violence, and why would you ever want that to happen? If it does, they know what to do and they'll get to work. But until that time, they want to live a great life.
That's a beautiful point. It reminds me of I'm sure you know who Dan Henderson is, the great fighter.
Oh yeah.
So Dan is he's like the definition of a tough guy that never has ever felt pressured to show it or to talk about it. And we spent my father-in-law and I and one of my buddies spent a full day with Dan, like tailgating outside of the Super Bowl like years ago for some event. And Dan's just the nicest, quiet, just fun guy, super, like you say, courteous. And my father-in-law eventually asked him, he's like, Dan, tell me, like, if I get in a fight, like, it's like the old, I'm sure you get this all the time as fighters. I'm sure you get these. I've given you some of these questions like this today already. But what do I got to do, Dan? If I get in a fight, give me a move or something I got to take the guy out. What would you do? And Dan's like, I'd kick him in the balls. What do you mean? He's like, I'm not jiu-jitsu. I'm not doing that. I'd kick him in the balls. Then he'll bend over. Yeah. If I need to, I'll knee him in the face then. But kick him in the balls always. First move. And that's an Olympic wrestler, UFC fighter that knocks people out with his right hand all the time. And that's the natural, like the easiest way to get someone to at least have a reaction right away.
Yeah, well, that's the really interesting part about this is the scariest part for most people is like your dad probably at that point took a step back when he said that not because he was what you probably think, like, oh, hey, Dan, that was really a harsh reality. It was eminently achievable, meaning your dad could do that right now. It didn't take any special training. And that's the hard part for most of us to understand. We're already pre-wired for violence. We're really good at this. That's why we're the top predators. We are the top species. And we're not the top species because we're bigger, faster, and stronger. You know, I tell people all the time, hey, who wants to be thrown in a 10 by 10 cage with a 40-pound mountain lion that hasn't eaten in 2 days? You know, nobody's going to take that, you know. So it's not because of that. It's because we've got this brain that, you know, we create everything from the space shuttle to nuclear weapons. You know, that's what makes us dangerous. And we're built for that. Our eyes are forward. We're able to move. And when I talk to people all the time, when I train them, the hardest thing that they really have to come away from is, this is really kind of simple, stupid, and I'm actually pretty good at it. When I don't screw it up with bad thinking and I look at it as mechanical work, it's really easy for us to do this. Now, Dan couldn't do that in the ring because we've gamified violence, because if injury entered into a sports competition, it would be really visually boring for people. They wouldn't enjoy it because it would be over so fast. I mean, injury is not something fun to watch. You know, when you see that with somebody, there's nothing noble about it. There's nothing heroic about it. There's nothing athletic about it. It's just an injury, and it just wrecks things. You know, and that's really what it is. I mean, a guy like that is being eminently honest. I talk to these guys all the time that are there, and they complain. Like a lot of the jiu-jitsu guys, the world-class jiu-jitsu guys say, yeah, it's really a shame in an MMA match we're not able to really show off the best jiu-jitsu has to offer because, you know, somebody's punching us, somebody's hitting us, you know, and it just doesn't work as well when it comes to that. Not that jiu-jitsu doesn't have a big place in MMA. It's just, you know, it's just one of those realities that, you know, enabled, you know, to be able to show the art at its fullest, you can't necessarily incorporate striking that's there, because that can alter things very quickly. So again, you know, it's the right tool for the situation. I can take a submission move on any jiu-jitsu guy or anybody that uses any kind of like joint locks or anything, and I can show them how to turn that into an injury. So it's very easy to show people how to take things that are, you know, designed to submit somebody or take it to a pathological limit or get somebody to quit, and then on the street, how to use that same movement to save your life, you know, and make sure that the guy's brain is completely disengaged. And that's it. And that's the education. And most people, one of my friends in the industry, a guy named Tony Blauer, there's a story I tell about him all the time that I really appreciate. And he was on a plane. He'd been doing a lot of training and he was tired, and a lady tried to engage him, and she looked over and saw that, you know, he had, you know, some self-defense stuff, that some of his literature and stuff. And she said, oh, you're in self-defense. Yeah, I've always wanted to learn self-defense. And Tony, being Tony, he was a little irritated at that point. He looked at her. He said, no, you don't. You don't want to learn that. And she goes, what? No, I really don't. No, you don't want to learn self-defense, because if you had, you'd already be training right now. You'd be like me. You'd be doing this. He said, now, I think the question you wanted to ask me was, Tony, how can I live a life that minimizes the need for me to ever know self-defense? And he goes, I can help you with that. And that's really what most people want. Nobody really, I look at myself and like my instructor, cadre and people that do this. We're the mutants. We're the people that actually want to try to take this to a whole other level. We want to challenge ourselves physically and stuff. But that is a completely different, subset. That doesn't make us any better than the guy that knows how to just, basically take a rock and hit a guy in the back of the head until he doesn't move anymore. That works really well. Violence is very simple, straightforward, and stupid. It's wrapping your head around when it would ever be the appropriate time for us to use it in a civil society with being a law-abiding citizen. And that's the challenge. How can I put it into a context where it makes sense for somebody to actually understand that, hey, studying violence doesn't make you one of them, because we have stigmatized the study of violence in our society currently to the point to where the only people that have the tool available to them are really the predators. We do have some first responders that are able to use the tool of violence, and they do train in it correctly, but they're very few. The vast majority of us, don't have that anymore. You and I, if this was, 100 years ago, we wouldn't be considered full citizens unless we knew how to take care of ourselves, unless we knew self-defense, unless we knew some form of boxing or something. It was a rite of passage as a male that you had to be able to physically protect yourself and also physically protect your family and your assets and everything. We recognized that that we couldn't rely on first responders, that we had to, some way, shape, or form, take responsibility for ourselves and our own self-defense, as an inherent right of what we have. And we've lost all of that. And so I'm just trying to open up the discussion again to say, hey, it's not bad to look at this stuff. And again, if anything, the really unique part about this is the more you understand the subject, the more peaceful your life is. Because once you understand the subject, you don't want to bring it into any part of your life if you don't have to.
Wow. Well said, Tim. That's it for me. I really appreciate your time. Where would you drive people if they want to look you up and everything and the target focus training? Where would you send them?
It really is easy. They can do right now. The best benefit from them is to either go to timlarkin.com or, the book's here. It's when violence is the answer.com. Either one of those places, if you are going to help me out and pre-order the book, I'm offering a 10-module video course that goes into, if you like what, you and I were talking about today, I offer this free to anybody that gets one of my books. We're going to go in depth in the subject, and we're going to really, answer a lot of questions and stuff. And there's a lot of good free information. If they don't want to buy the book, there's still a lot of great free information that I have there that, again, I just like to get this message out. I'm not trying to, do anything other than tell people that it's okay to look at this subject matter. And I can't thank you enough, AJ, for letting me talk to your car, because honestly, this subject scared away some people. There are others in the media that just have shied away from even talking about this. And I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to, especially a group like yours, and talk about this subject.
Oh, no problem. It's my pleasure. Thank you so much. It's an honor to have you on. I think people will love the book, and we will follow your progress down the road. And hopefully some people are going to have some more awareness just from listening and watching this. I know I'm going to be checking it out. My wife's getting the money out of the ATM tonight. I got my back turned. I'm guarding.
Make sure you're guarding, man.
I'm looking around. So yeah. All right, Tim. Thanks so much, man. Appreciate it.
You got it, man. Bye.
Bye.
We're glad you could join us for today's conversation. After you subscribe to the show, head over to thehawkcast.com or reach out to AJ directly on Twitter at @officialAJHawk to recommend future guests that will help us inspire people to keep talking. Thanks again, and we look forward to speaking with you next time on the HawkCast.